My name is Nicholas Santantonio. I'm the small grains breeder at Virginia Tech, and I develop new varieties of wheat and barley that are grown both here in Virginia as well as in the surrounding area. We have a lot of acreage of wheat, for example, in North Carolina. Probably more in North Carolina than we do in Virginia. And today I'm going to be talking about malting barley. We've only been working on malting barley since about 2010. I'm not going to go too much into the history of that, but just to say that was a project that was started largely because there were malt houses like Jeff's that were, looking for grain that they could malt. There were distilleries that wanted, malt that was local. In particular, Copper Fox kind of got us on this whole thing, and so we started really breeding malt barley varieties in 2010. We released our first one in 2020, which I'll touch on here. And we have a whole bunch more in the pipeline that I wish I could release out into the real world. But we have seed production problems that are associated with the fact that malt barley is really grown on relatively small acreage. And for it to be manageable for a seed producer, they need to have a certain quantity of scale, right? Like, they have to be able to grow enough of it to make it worth it to them. So I could release a new malt barley variety every year, but we just don't have the seed production for it. So if you are a producer and are interested in that, or interested in setting up some kind of relationship with a seed grower, please come talk to me. I can get you connected with people who might be able to do that. Okay. Barley production. This is what barley production looked like about 150 years ago. You'll notice that most of the production is in the Finger Lakes and the Central Valley of California there. A little bit in Pennsylvania. Virginia doesn't really show up, but almost all, a good portion, if not most of the barley was grown east of the Mississippi River. 50 years later, it's really migrated to that Midwestern region, the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, even Iowa. Iowa used to grow something other than corn. I don't think you'll find a single acre of barley in Iowa anymore. And then by 1950, you've seen a lot of progression west, and now into states like Montana and Idaho, which are very important, Oregon to some extent, but still have a lot of production in those Dakotas and Wisconsin. This is what barley production in the United States looks like today. Idaho, Montana, and North Dakota is 90% of the barley production. So this is a very, very, very centralized production area in the United States, which, resiliency was brought up this morning, right? Problem with having very localized production is that when you have problems, excuse me, this animation is a little off. When you have a problem, like we did in 2021, where you have drought that, drastically affected that region, you'll notice that Idaho, Montana, North Dakota are all in severe drought there. They lost almost about a third of their crop that year. And so that caused a lot of the malt production, the malt houses that are located in that part of the country to source seed either from Canada or from other places. In fact, they had a lot of malt barley that was brought in from places like Argentina on big ships. So, right, and so we want to be able to produce enough barley in the United States that we don't have to import it, right? We can make it here. And you'll notice that the left-hand side of that map seems to have a problem, and the right-hand side of it doesn't. Okay, in terms of water. So we generally don't see the same kind of drought problems that they see out west. Now, does drought happen? Do we have drought problems here at times? Yes. Last year, we right around flowering for small grain, which would have been early to mid-May, we were looking at relatively low water. That stuck on for a long time. There were some places that got enough of a shot right after flowering that they were able to to continue, and then there were other places that lost quite a bit because the drought continued. They didn't unfortunately the rain can be rather fickle, right? You get it and your neighbor doesn't, or vice versa. But generally, we just don't have that problem here, especially because in this part of the country, the small grain is planted in the fall and harvested in spring. So you're planting that crop at a time where you have moisture in the ground, right? It's not unlike up here that grows spring barley. That's all planted in late April, early May, and then it's harvested in August. So this is a very different timeline, right? So they get the heat and the drought. We don't have that problem here. So I think that there's a real potential for the eastern U.S. to serve as a production region that, to some extent, buffers the system, right? So we are never going to be a large production area that is going to be sending, grain to Anheuser-Busch, or malt rather, to Anheuser-Busch and Coors, right? But what we can do is produce enough here that when that upper Northwest, upper Midwest rather, has a production problem, it doesn't drive the cost of malt up so high here that it's not feasible. So growing barley in this region, so we're in Loudoun County now. I work a lot with John Branding at Wheatland Spring, who has been growing on his farm in organic fashion. I also work with a lot of producers in the Northern Neck, so that's a little bit south and east of here. And barley does very well in Virginia. We have a very good climate for barley. It's cool enough during the time when these things will be flowering, and then during grain fill, we typically get good yield and good test weight. We've had, I think 2023, which was an unusual year, but 2023 we had yields I had barley lines that were yielding up to about 180 bushels an acre. And so, it is very possible to do here. Now, that was an odd year. That's unusual. Okay. We probably won't see a year like that again for a very long time. But talking a little bit about planting. So timing, depending upon how far north you are or whether or not you're in the mountains. So in Blacksburg, we plant earlier. So because we're up in the mountains in Southwest Virginia. But in the Northern Neck, you're usually looking about mid to late October. You can dip into November. This year would have been a bad year to have planted in November. We did, because we didn't get a drop of rain from about September 23rd until November 10th. So for me, I have to wait on those kind of those things because I need everything to germinate at the same time. And if we'd had come in, had a quarter inch, I might have had some plots that germinated and others didn't. And then I've got these differences between the plots. So we wait until we have moisture to plant into. I generally suggest that people do too. The only thing is if you're really in a drought situation during planting, if you dust it in, you want to put it in at a much shallower depth than this. So typically we recommend inch and a half. You can go up to 2 inches if there's moisture down there. That's what I did in Blacksburg this year. So we planted about 2 inches because we had moisture about inch and a half. Take your knife, stick it in the ground, figure out where that moisture is. If you don't have moisture down very far, you can put this stuff in relatively shallow, and then if you get a rain, then it'll start right away. And for normal production, that's usually safe with small grain. Densities. If you're interested about some of these things, please come see me. We also have an agronomist at Virginia Tech that knows a lot about this stuff. So I'd be happy to help you with some of these densities. Usually I just calculated about 3 bushels an acre is about what most people are going to do. And then for barley in particular, we highly recommend using a seed treatment that has an insecticide on it. We have seen a rise in barley yellow dwarf virus. I'll talk about that here briefly, but barley yellow dwarf virus can really wipe out a whole crop. It's very bad. It is transmitted by aphids. So the aphids get onto the seedlings in the fall, they transmit the virus, and then they can kill the plant. Now, if you have planted treated seed, you get about maybe 3-4 weeks of protection, and that can get you into the point where it's cold enough that you're not going to have a problem with the aphids. Okay? But they will come back in the spring, and then they will get a spring infection. Now, spring infections tend to be a lot less detrimental than fall infections. But a spring infection still will reduce yield. It will cause stunting. I'll show that in a minute. Wheat, you can get away with no seed treatment, but barley, I really don't recommend that you do. Now, if you're doing organic, there's not much you can do about that. So I highly recommend looking for resistant varieties, which we do have resistance to barley yellow dwarf.
I suggest that if you treat the seed with good biology and make the plant healthy right from its germination, that it may avoid any aphid feeding.
Okay. So in terms of fertilization, so under conventional fertilization, we really recommend a pre-plant fertilizer. I don't know, 25, 30 pounds of nitrogen kind of a thing. It's good to check some of those, some of those micronutrients. There is soil testing that is available at Virginia Tech for free for farmers. You send a soil sample and they will send you back what your soil looks like. They will not quantify nitrogen for reasons I don't exactly understand, and which frustrate me. I wish that was included there. But I think that they're doing it because they're not trying to make fertilizer recommendations for nitrogen. We highly recommend for growing small grain is to do a split application for wheat, and I should have, this is a slide I had modified for another talk. For barley, we really, so typically you would do a split application. You're looking at, an application late February, early March, and then a second one late March, early April. But for barley, we really recommend skipping the second one. So if you put on nitrogen late in the season, they will end up turning that nitrogen into proteins. So proteins have nitrogen in them, and those proteins will end up in the grain, and then you have problems with having too much protein in the grain. Although, I don't know, maybe you can talk a little bit more about whether or not that really matters. So we highly recommend tissue testing. I'm not going to give any fertilizer recommendations here. You really should talk to an agronomist, or oftentimes seed reps can give you really good information on what you should be planting, or what you should be using for fertilizer. Organic systems, I don't really know a lot about this. I know that some of them are using chicken litter. If you have a contract with a dairy that's nearby, right, using manure slurry kind of a thing can be very effective. Green manure, unfortunately, seems like a good idea, but you're not actually adding anything to the system. You're just putting that stuff back into the ground. So, every time you take a grain out of a field, you're removing nutrients from that field. It doesn't come back in until you put something new back in. So planting something and then growing it and then tilling in that green only puts what was taken out back in. Okay, so you're not really turning this. You're not getting something new. So at some point, you've got to add a new source, right? If you are an organic farmer and you do a spring application, I would love to know what you do. I've heard a few people that do some various things. I don't know how effective they are, so please come find me. I'd love to know.
Sodium nitrate.
Okay, say again?
Sodium nitrate.
And what is the source from?
It's naturally mined.
Okay.
Organic.
Okay.
15%.
Okay.
Water solubilized back guano from Chile.
Okay. Back guano, sure. Yeah. There are some challenges for growing in this region. Part of the reason why you saw that migration of barley from the east to the west is because it's wet here. And that moisture causes a lot of problems with disease. It can also cause problems with pre-harvest sprouting. I'll talk about briefly. Fusarium head blight is a problem that did not used to be a problem until we started going to a no-till system. So our corn, soybean, used to be, the classic double crop is you plant the corn in the spring, harvest in the fall, drill your small grain into the corn stubble, and then you are harvesting the small grain in the late spring, early summer, and then you're drilling your beans right into that stubble. Okay, that's the no-till. That's the double crop no-till system. When we moved to that system, that corn stubble still in the field acted as a place for these funguses to hide. This is what it looks like in 6-row barley. That is effectively nuked. So almost 100% infection. You see all those brown heads. In fact, there's only one head where you can actually see some green, that one here. So that's highly infected. There is resistance to it. Okay, so in terms of genetic resistance, here's an example. On the left, you see all the brown. That's an experimental line of ours that didn't make it because it was susceptible. And then we've got varieties like Greg, for example, which we released in 2020, that is highly resistant. But scab doesn't have the same. Okay, so scab produces the fungus infects during flowering, and it grows in the developing seed, and it produces a toxin. So a mycotoxin called deoxynivalenol, or DON. If your DON levels are above 1 ppm, it's no longer safe for human consumption. That's actually a quite low threshold. And so, this really needs to be managed. I don't know how this changes in the malting process. Do you touch on that at all?
Oh, the DON?
DON can change? Because it can go up, right? Because the fungus can grow during the malt process, right?
The malting
process, the steep, early malting, so steeping and germination is, gives it the perfect environment to continue to develop. So, Don and pretty much any other fungal load. We've seen some weird stuff year to year that's not Don.
Sure.
That is a horrendous bloom sometimes. So, you can make it, you can bloom it and make it worse during malting.
Okay.
But some of it will get washed off when you steep.
Right, but some of it gets washed off.
Then you get some proliferation during germination. I mean, you kill everything in the kiln, so it's sort of net, at least from my
It's a wash.
Sometimes it goes up a little, but in general, you don't want to process anything that's above it.
Okay, so you guys will actually test raw grain and not malt if it's. Hopefully you haven't bought it yet, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be like a rejection.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I and not to belabor this, but the test for Don, I have a bit of a rub with in that Fusarium head blight does not automatically always produce deoxynivalenol.
Correct.
And so, but what the grain quality test is measuring is the presence of Fusarium, not deoxynivalenol.
Right.
And so you can get a high Fusarium ppm score, like 1.6, which is above the 1 ppm, but that's Fusarium. That is not Don, though the test line says your Don score is 1.6.
Are you sure about that? I thought that they did Don testing.
I went into the depths of this with Harmony.
Okay.
And so it is not a linear test. So it's to me, it's kind of like unfair. But I'll talk about some methods of potentially cleaning and re-scoring that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, here you can see there's just like a single kernel that's been infected. This is generally kind of how it starts. It can actually kill the developing head moving forward. So some sources of resistance are actually just about stopping that thing from spreading. So there is some genetic resistance out there, but unlike a lot of other diseases, there's no such thing as perfect resistance. Okay? Even our most highly resistant varieties, which we've been working on for 2 decades, still get some Fusarium head blight. It's impossible to go to zero. Other problems you're going to see, and I cheated a little bit. I didn't have a good picture of, and I don't know if you guys can see this at all anyway, but other problems, powdery mildew can be an issue. Here is scald, or excuse me, it's not scald, it's spot blotch or net blotch. You do see scald, but it's pretty rare. A lot of varieties are resistant to it, and it looks like cigar burns, kind of. But I don't see it very often, and when I do, it's usually on something that's highly susceptible, and then most of the other things don't get it. I wouldn't be too concerned. Leaf rust. So these are all fungal pathogens. Powdery mildew is probably the bigger problem for barley because it can come in earlier, especially in terms of using some kind of a fungicide, especially if you're controlling for Fusarium head blight. If you are spraying for Fusarium head blight, you usually don't have to worry about something like leaf rust, which is going to come in later, but mildew can come in early, and if it does, it can cause significant drops in yield as well as test weight. So that's one to really keep an eye on. Again, there's this difference between conventional versus organic. And I'll talk about that in a second, but for organic systems, highly recommend looking for resistant varieties. That's really the best thing you can do. I would suggest using resistant varieties when you can, always, but there's not always the option to do that. This is an example of what barley yellow dwarf virus can do in a fall infection. You can see the plot next. This plot is very. It's stunted. Some of the plants have died. Maybe the plants were weak in the fall, and part of it was barley yellow dwarf, but also winter kill and stuff like that can result in this. But you can see it's stunted. In fact, if you look at this plot, which looks relatively healthy, this corner of it has barley yellow dwarf, and you can see it because all of the heads are much shorter than the rest of them, right? And it's all stunted on the corner there. This is a big problem, because we bred resistance for this 50 years ago in all of the feed barleys that were grown in Virginia. Okay, so all of the feed barleys are generally highly resistant to this, especially towards spring infection. But when we started growing, bringing in European varieties to develop malt barley, two-row malt barley, we brought in a lot of susceptibility with it, okay? So if you are looking at some of the common varieties that are grown, and last year was one of the worst years we've ever seen for barley yellow dwarf, both in barley as well as in wheat, so it infects wheat as well. Last year, Violetta, Calypso, Flavia, all got hit really hard with barley yellow dwarf. And so we don't really recommend growing those varieties because that you can have this happen. So look for resistant varieties. Avalon, which is our two-row that we released recently, has quite a bit of resistance, but it will show some symptoms. We're working on getting things out there that have like perfect resistance.
I got a question.
Yeah.
For once the virus is established, how long will it be viable, and does it need the host to?
Yeah. So the virus lives in the aphid, right? Then the aphid goes to the grass, right? The small grain. It infects the small grain. That virus will be in there until that plant dies. Okay. So until it does its whole life cycle, it may or may not go to seed, but once it does. That seed will no longer have the virus in it, okay? So the virus is not transmitted through the seed. That doesn't happen. But the plant itself will have it throughout the rest of its life. And then, of course, it lives on in the aphid populations. And so here's an example. This is a more typical example of what you'll see in barley yellow. You see this kind of patchiness. It's kind of stunted and growing. Next to, another line that also has a little bit of it. You can see a little bit of it here and here. It's kind of, a little bit... The heads don't tend to want to fall over. They tend to stand straight up and they're shorter. And so you can tell that like this line got hit a lot harder than that one did, but that one got it too. In fact, those were some of our best scab resistant lines that we had to drop because they're getting barley yellow dwarf. Here's kind of a close up. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but that's that fall infection. Whereas this image is probably spring infection, early spring infection. I don't know for sure, but. So for disease control, really, Fusarium head blight is probably the biggest problem. We highly recommend, we've got some great fungicides for scab these days. Miravis Ace, Prosaro, Carumba are all good products, and they have to be applied very close to flowering. It used to be you had to apply them the day that they flowered, and now there's about, 5, 6, 7 days window that you have there that, you get good control. And then that scab spray will generally control for the other fungal pathogens, right? Mildew or leaf rust, you're not going to really have a problem with those. The only one to look out for is mildew. It can come in early. And then, barley yellow dwarf I mentioned using treated seed or using varieties that have resistance. Yeah, and again, the answer for organic is always, there's really very little you can do other than practices. So like for Fusarium head blight, don't follow corn. Would be a good idea. If your neighbor has a large cornfield, probably not a good idea to plant, small grain next to it, especially if he had it in the previous year. So there's sometimes nothing you can do about that. You can look for more resistant cultivars, but like I said, there's nothing that's perfectly resistant to Fusarium head blight. But for these other, fungal pathogens, mildew, rust, those we do have good resistance to those, and so that's something to look for. If you want to know more about varieties, please come talk to me. I can help you find those. And then, of course, barley yellow dwarf I'm going to hammer on over and over and over again, just because it's been such a problem. So in terms of harvest, really, when you reach 15%, even sometimes, if you have the ability to dry grain, cut it as soon as you can cut it. Okay, I know growers that'll cut at 18, 19, 20% because they have the capacity to dry their grain. If you don't have the capacity to dry your grain, you need to get under 16. If you are growing malt, I highly recommend you find some kind of a system for drying your grain, because there will be years where you can't get it out before it's 15 without it getting rained on. So once this thing hits about 15.5% moisture, if it gets rained on, it will start malting in the field, all right? Which is not what you want. All right, and you can see here, it's a little hard to see, but this is a barley that has already started to sprout. You can see that the coleoptile coming out there. From just getting rained on, okay? That was in New York. We don't generally see sprouting that bad out here, but if you don't get it out of the field, that will happen, especially with malt barleys, because that's what they do. Now, Generally, a lot of the varieties that are grown here have some degree of dormancy in the seed, and that protects them against this a little bit. But my recommendation is always, look, you've done all of this hard work up until now. This seems to be your number one top priority thing that you're doing, is getting that grain out as soon as it's dry enough to get out. That has to be number one top priority. And if you're growing wheat and barley, do the barley first. Well, barley's going to mature about two weeks earlier anyway. But you know, if you've got other things going on, maybe you're getting ready to plant beans, maybe you're getting ready to plant corn, whatever it is you're doing, the barley's got to be your number one priority. Because if it gets rained on, you're gonna go from having something that's $8, $9, $10 a bushel to something that you're lucky if you can sell it at $2.30 a bushel as feed. Okay, we're you know, the market isn't even there anymore. So other things to look out for. I'm really curious to see winter kill this year. I have not seen any significant winter injury that will result in death of the plant yet, because we had a real cold winter this year, especially in, I mean, I don't know what it was like in some of the other parts of the state, but southwestern Virginia really got hammered. We got in single digits with no snow cover. Snow cover is a good thing. If you have snow cover and it gets down, you know, -5, -10, you probably won't have any problems. If they're bare out in that, you can see some winter kill. Most of the varieties that are out there right now will not have winter kill, although we had one that got entered into the state test this year that got completely cooked. And so that's why we do those tests. I won't say whose product that was, but it wasn't ours. This variety, so you can see, right, this looks completely dead next to ones that still have a lot of green. That actually is not dead. That thing grew back out and yielded just fine. But if you see that kind of yellow, you should be a little concerned. But this yellowing, you see this little bit of winter damage, is not going to really hurt them. Finally, just a brief note. I really do not recommend you go out and plant malt barley without having a contract in place. Now, that doesn't necessarily need to be a piece of paper. It can be a handshake, but you need to know a malter that wants to buy that product, because the problem is that it's going to need to sit somewhere for some amount of time in between harvest and malting. And if you don't have a buyer for it, you may find that you can't sell it. So I just highly recommend, if you're going to do malt barley, you should get that contract established first. And storage is a problem. It has been a problem. It will continue to be a problem. Usually the grower does. Well, often growers don't have storage available, and the malt houses generally don't have much storage available, if any. So something to keep in mind. Which barley should you grow? Obviously, you know, the 2-row malt is kind of the classic. People want, you know, most brewers want 2-row. I think that's largely because they are used to buying 2-row spring barley from Germany, and that has very high quality, and that they somehow associate 6 rows with lower quality. I don't know that that's really the case. I'm pretty certain we could develop 6-row varieties that did just as well as some of the 2 rows. There is a little bit more variability in seed size and shape is the biggest issue there. But you know, there are these ones that are called 6-row lax. So you can see, like, this is a compact head. Those seeds are growing closer together, and they tend to be more flattened. Yeah.
What makes it 6-row? What makes it 2-row?
Oh, good. Oh, yeah, good question. Here you go. So these 6 rows, maybe I have. Yeah, this is actually an easier way to explain. So 6-row means that each floret. So there's a floret on this side and a floret on that side. There's 3 seeds per, okay? A 2-row, right? You imagine it like this, okay? So on a 2-row, these axial ones don't develop into seeds. So you just have the 2 on either side. And so this is what a 6-row looks like. You can see, it's not the best angle, but these are actually the axials, and then the primary is kind of behind there. You can see it better here, right? You got 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, those are both 6 rows. A 2-row looks like this, and on those axial would have grown right here along the stem coming out at you, but they didn't. They don't develop. And so the 2 rows tend to have more uniform seed size. They tend to be bigger, but that has to do with the fact that a lot of 6 rows were grown for feed, and that really wasn't a goal. Finally, just a little pitch for Avalon. So we developed our first 2-row malt variety. I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, we started on this in 2010. We released Avalon in 2020. Right, breeding cycle takes about 10 years, 10, 12 years. We're now at a place where Avalon is really under pretty significant commercial production. I think we estimated about 8,000 acres last year, which we were really happy about. for malt, that makes a lot of beer. So we're very, very excited about it. This is in the Northern Neck. Here it is down in North Carolina, and here it is up in Illinois. So we're seeing a pretty big footprint. There's been a lot of rapid adoption. I know that you've malted with it. Proximity has done a lot of malting with it. So I recommend Avalon, right? So Avalon was developed here in the East. It is adapted to the East, unlike some of the European varieties which were developed in Europe and brought here, right? BYD is a good example of why those might not be your best option. And our breeding program has a whole bunch, like this is a bunch of seed increases, right? Like here, I'm talking about some of these varieties. Those are the ones up front, but there's, another 200 behind them. They're all new breeding varieties. And we develop them every single year. We're just not really in a space where we can release them regularly because we don't have the seed production part figured out. So we can produce seed, but we're more used to doing it at a scale that doesn't necessarily align with having a lot of different varieties out there at the same time. But if you are interested, I'd be more than happy to talk with you about the possibilities that are available there. And then I just want to finalize this by saying thank you to Mr. Wincy Brooks. He was our barley breeder from 1993 to 2023. 2023, yeah. So he retired very recently, and he is the reason why our malt barley program has really was successful and is successful. We're currently in the midst of rehiring that position. And during his career, I always see I'm seeing the next one. That's the problem. So this is Wincy in orange, and here he is in the greenhouse making some crosses. He released about 13 varieties during his time at Virginia Tech. And then just really, really final last one. These are a couple of the girls that have, young women, that have come through our program. Both of them were doing, Amelia did a master's. Lexi is currently working on a master's developing GN0 barley. So that doesn't produce glycosidic nitrile, which is not a problem for brewing, but is a problem for distilling. It produces a carcinogen there. So she's working on developing a GN0 line. We're hoping to release one by 2029. And then this is our team, just to thank them. Couldn't do this work without them. And then these are the various funding agencies, and that's Blacksburg there. That's one of my fields. That was my first year here. And then I'll take some, let's save questions. Let's just jump right into yours, and then we can do questions at the end. Okay. Perfect.
In this case, this ends at 12:30, right?
12:30. I think you have. I know. I went over a little bit. Sorry.
I'll be perfect. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Bloem. I'm the founder of Murphy & Rood Malting Company. We opened with actual full racks of malted grains in early February 2018, so we're within our 7-year existence here. We started quite small. We started about 120 malt tons per year. So just to give you a quick economy of scale comparison, the large Malthouses that I'll show you a map of here in a second are typically producing batch sizes in the area of about 400 tons. So it would take me 4 years to produce what they make in 1 week. So I'm very, very significant to this industry. So you can, in early 2023, we did what I would call a right-sizing expansion. So we finally caught up. We did pretty well with demand, and we caught up with that by adding another germination vessel that more than doubled our production, actually almost tripled our production because we could run another simultaneous batch, but we could also start running them closer together. And so it kind of removed our bottleneck at the time. So we're at about 320 malt tons a year now, and are, 24/7. There are not people in the malt house 24 hours a day, but there's somebody in the malt house at some point in the day, 7 days a week. And so I just wanted to present a couple thoughts around, there's some myth busting to do out there. I'll walk you through a little bit of just the malting process in general, but busting a few myths confirming a few truths, and then just trying to offer a higher volume wholesale diversification option into farms that are row cropping. Because as Nick's presentation suggested, we are not even close to where we were in, I'd say, 2012, 2010. We had a big fat 0 2-row malting varieties, whether they were bred here or somewhere else. Endeavor was our first test case. Billy Dawson out in the Northern Neck in Heathsville with Bay's Best Feed. He took the chance of growing a 2-row malting variety called Endeavor. That is about when I started teaching myself how to malt in my basement. There's a blackout period because we had a kid at the time. I don't know what the hell led me to building a small little 200-pound malting system in my basement. But what really got me into this is the agricultural side. And so when Endeavor arrived, we saw some gas be added to the fire. And Billy should be given tons of credit. And I should say the late Billy Dawson. We lost him too early. But for taking the chance that nobody else wanted to take and inspired others to come behind him. So now we have, with the help of Virginia Tech, not only Endeavor is not great here. It's better for, upstate New York climates, I'd say. But we now have multiple varieties that you saw on Nick's slide. And so we can operate at malt house scales of my size. We can operate with farmers growing as few as like 10 acres. That typically we try to work in 10-acre increments. 10 acres is about a truckload for all intents and purposes. And so it is an approachable volume. You do not need to be growing thousands of acres just to work with a malt house. With the advent of craft malting, there's, there's probably close to about 80 of us worldwide. And we're much, much smaller than these big guys. And so we can work with more numerous small farmers and growers, which adds a diversification option for you all. So just quickly, malting, what is it? So we are really, for all intents and purposes, I watch grass grow for a living. So we are essentially just harnessing the natural progression of growth of a barley seed under controlled conditions. And so we are typically growing in these germination boxes. So this was our first box on the left. That's about a 2.5-ton batch. The second box, this was our ad. That's about 4 tons. And so we're working with the bed in this is about, I'd say about 32 inches. So we're working with quite a few acres worth of grain in a 600 square foot box. And so as you can imagine, as barley seeds wake up and begin to germinate, they start respirating and breathing out heat and CO2 just like we do, and demand cool, fresh, humid air. And so we need to control that with conditions. And so my costs of goods are raw grain and utilities. And so our utility costs are the largest expense in malting. I throw a bag of trash in the dumpster like maybe once every 3 weeks. But our water bill is like $4,000. Wow. Every few months. So it is a lot of control that's necessary. Humidification, refrigeration, high flow indirect heating kilns, all consuming natural gas and electricity and propane, so on and so forth. And so we are really just driving the germination process under industrial controlled conditions. And if you can picture malting, so the starchy endosperm of a kernel of grain, if you view that endosperm as a block of concrete with small and large marbles interspersed within it, the large and the small marbles are the starch granules. The concrete is the protein matrix that surrounds those starch granules. Malting, what we are trying to do is make those starch granules extractable for the brewer or distiller. And so we are coaxing out the enzymes that the barley is naturally creating to break that concrete down. And so those starch granules are eventually meant to be converted by the subset of those enzymes to convert the marbles into sugar to feed the germ or the embryo to reach that 1.5 inch depth that you planted to reach sunlight. So it's that endosperm is essentially the packed lunch for that barley kernel to grow. We are just harnessing the power of what it's doing and stopping it at a very specific time so that we make the starch exposed and extractable, but we're not actually allowing those enzymes to convert into sugar quite yet. Malthouses don't make sugar for breweries and distilleries. It's a common misconception. We are allowing that starch to be extractable. I wouldn't have nothing to sell a brewer or a distiller if I converted all the starch to sugar. One of my main selling points is the extract of a given kernel of barley. And so we are just modifying that kernel through the process of germination. So we touched on this a little bit. So mainly speaking, we are driving enzyme activation and development. And that's starting and steeping, step one. And then we are working on starch cell wall breakdown during germination. And then we are developing flavor and color as part of kilning. And so I'm going to walk you through briefly the malting process. So obviously growers are here. We are typically, in the case, and Nick was correct, not many craft malt houses have indefinite storage. I for one, have a 40-foot reefer container, and that is my extra storage. I don't have any other room. I don't own my building. I lease it. And so we do, these silos or these grain bins of brewing barley are typically in a big malt house construct on malt house property. And so growers are bringing in their crop, bulk dump trailers or hopper bottoms, and dumping everything they've got to that malt house, and they all take it, all those harvests all at once. We don't typically work like that because I would have to have acres worth of storage infrastructure. And so we do typically take it in gradual increments. And so we will talk a little bit about on-grain storage. But once we bring it into the malt house around here, we'll start steeping that. There's two priorities there. We're just raising moisture content to trigger germination. But what we're also doing in steeping is we're hydrating all of that starchy endosperm. So we have to get all of the water all the way to the core. In order for enzymes to do their work when the aleurone layer releases them, there needs to be a water pathway. So these enzymes are hydrolytic, so they need a highway to travel on. If there is no water throughout the full endosperm, we can't break down all of the concrete. And breaking down the concrete is my main goal in all of this. And so hydration is the first priority. What the moisture content is to get that is secondary. If it needs to be 48, fine. If it needs to be 42, great. 42 does not dictate 80% hydration, nor does 49 dictate 100% hydration. It is all about what that mainly protein composition is of that endosperm, and so we have to change the way we steep every new lot of grain, and that can change from the same variety, same farm, year over year. They just have a different personality every year. So every year we're learning what kind of attitude a particular grain has. So we'll steep out generally over 40%, 42 to 45, and we will move it into germination. It will stay here in controlled conditions for anywhere from 3, 4, 5, sometimes up to 6 days. And then we will move it to the kiln and shut that process down. All of this, we are also a specialty malt house, so we do have a drum roaster. We're somewhat unique in that in that area, we have about 33 different products, and the roaster helps us make quite a number of those. And so then all the rest is just dressing for packaging. But so this is generally the process that a given barley harvest is going into. Oh. And then this will be very similar to Nick's map, but this is the problem with the malting industry currently, is that they are where the barley has historically been, or it's 10,000 miles away in Europe. A lot of craft brewers are choosing to send it from here over here because these malt houses during the macro lager days of AB InBev and Molson Coors and all of them, they were not producing barley that craft brewers would use. That's macro lager brewing. It's 6-row, very high protein, and they're converting raw grain and rice. That is not how craft breweries work. They are, for all intents and purposes, all grain or all malt brewing, and so they do not need the same specs as that 6-row barley that Budweiser uses.
So Anheuser-Busch has actually made a full transition to 2-row.
And I mean, and it was most certainly necessary. I mean, I do not, brewers, for all, and I don't want to go too down a rabbit hole here, but brewers don't like 6-row because they were taught not to like 6-row.
That's right.
They don't know why they don't like 6-row. And if you're a brewer in here, and I'm insulting your intelligence, sorry. So the fact of the matter is that I've malted 52-pound test weight 6-row. And so it exists. And it's not, the 6-row is not high protein, necessarily low extract necessarily. It certainly has a preponderance to be. But the reason 6-row was historically known to be high protein is because of those 3 extra pollinating nodes, I guess the 2 extra on each side. And so those kernels are packed in that head like Nick was showing. And that typically reduces kernel plumpness, which translates to a lower starch offset to the protein. And so the protein spikes up a little bit. But that is not necessarily the case. So you can still grow exceedingly high test weight 6-row. And so it's kind of a misnomer. But for all intents and purposes, getting back to the point here, a lot of European malt is being imported to the U.S. because these guys have been craft brewing forever. And so the barley they were producing was better meant for craft brewing, where AB InBev and Molson Coors were driving, through big malt houses like Cargill. They were producing a malt that was just meant for enzymatic potential. And that is it, because they were getting all of their extract from raw corn and rice and all of the other non-malted adjuncts. And so what this has led us into is that the world of malt is really driven by very large distribution companies, which are owned by malt companies. And so RAR, for instance, owns BSG, Brewer Supply Group. They move their own barley, their own malt products through BSG, but they also move a bunch of European ones and a few other domestic ones. And so they're capitalizing on establishing their own supply chain or distribution channels, if you will. And so what it is really turned into is it's an undiversified supply chain. So most of these companies are all grouped together. These days, so this is, a lot of these areas in Wisconsin and Minnesota, that's Brees for one of them, they're still pulling in barley from Wyoming. So they're still, they have storage and fields out there, and then they rail car it in. They were here in the upper Midwest here because of the shipping channel, so to be able to get it out. And so we have kind of tripped our way into a very undiversified supply chain. Most of about 95% of the malt being used in the country is produced by 3 malt houses, all of which are consuming each other now. So, that has probably become 2. Bort Malt bought United Malt owned a bunch of other large malt houses, so they're all kind of consolidated even further. And this is very new, like 2023, these consolidations are happening. And so we're working on unsustainable distances if we're looking at ourselves here. Now, mind you, there is a small addition in Delaware with Proximity Malt. I believe, and do not quote me on this, I believe they're running small. They're not as big as a big malt house. They have 2 locations, but they're still running smaller batches. But they are still quite large in the realm of malt production. So we do have one smaller large malt house in Delaware here. So we do have a little bit of, and the name Proximity is a testament to kind of their efforts to bring the supply chain closer to where they're making it. So the other problem with the distribution company model is that there's actually no direct customer supplier relationships. And so breweries do not talk to the people that actually malted the grain. They're talking to the distribution sales rep. And so we sell direct. We don't sell through distribution. So when you're talking to us, you're talking to the people who actually made the stuff during the week. And then just roughly where we source. So we strategically place fields across the Commonwealth for Mother Nature reasons. Northern Neck, Middle Peninsula, Madison County, Loudoun County, Danville, Chase City, Christiansburg / Blacksburg, and then an exciting new grain elevator going in Southwest Virginia. So we have segregated our fields purposely. So we are purposely not putting all of our eggs into one basket, so that when weather's bad on one side of the state, we have potential other options if we lose harvests. So this is what we are, generally speaking, malting now. So 2-row barley. My 2 primary varieties are Violetta and Avalon. Calypso used to be in that list. I'm starting to break up with Calypso. Calypso is wonderful in that it has tons of onboard dormancy. And so typically in these breeding efforts, most certainly for the large malt houses in the grain belt, they have bred dormancy out. They want to be able to harvest it and malt it pretty quickly. What's that?
Same day.
Yes. And so dormancy, however, is actually a pretty useful tool for us because we have wet springs. And so dormancy can be a bit of an insurance policy against pre-harvest sprout damage, which I will get to a list here in a second, but pre-harvest sprout damage is our number one problem as a malt house. It's not your number one problem as a grower. It's the number one reason we can't take grain, because sprout damage, the first thing to go is alpha amylase, and I'm selling alpha amylase when I'm producing malts. And so if it's already been malted in the field, I don't have anything to produce from it. And then, so the knock with Calypso is that while it's got a lot of dormancy, it's got a really weird kernel dimension. It's very long, but it's skinny and kind of flat. And so it's very sensitive to test weight. So really you have to hit like 48 and above. I would probably shoot for like 50 pounds test weight in Calypso. And 47, 1 pound per bushel less, completely changes the kernel sizing, and we have a lot of yield loss because we have to grade our barley to a specific screen size, which I'll touch on in a minute here. So Calypso, if it's the option that you need to grow, great. I will never ask you to grow Calypso, but it is still an option. Just know that you have to knock it out of the park. But you have that insurance policy of dormancy. Violetta and Avalon are our 2 kind of lead runners here. Avalon, we're malting much more now. Violetta has always been my kind of favorite child. And then Avalon's kind of competing with it at this point. Violetta is just malts beautifully, and it's easy to control, and it's predictable. So, and we've always seemed to have pretty good harvests of it. We also do a smaller amount of 6-row barley. So Thoroughbred, Hirondella, Marijuana, which was on Nick's slide. I'm also a secret big fan of Hullis barley. So we have malted Amaze 10 and Dan. Greg, which was on Nick's slide, that is our next Hullis variety because it is parented off of a 2-row variety. So the knock with the previous 2-row Hullis is that it was just very small because it had 6-row parentage. But the potential upside of Hullis barley is predominantly in distilling, in that you can get much higher yield without all of that husk material clogging up the volume of your mash tun. So we just need to get the specs right, and so typically Hullis barley's had a lot of very high level of beta glucan in it, which can be a problem in the brewing process. And so sometimes if it's really high, we can't get it down far enough during malting. It's in the concrete, if you know what I mean. So, but it's a really hard concrete, and so sometimes we can't ship it all away. And then soft wheat, we do malt predominantly soft red. We did sign marketing rights for a Virginia Tech bred variety called Venus. And that has been very fun. I know Nick's got others in the pipeline that we'll also be looking at. 6-row, soft white wheat, we don't grow a lot here for a reason, is because it's very susceptible to sprout damage. The catch here is that wheat is not used predominantly for its enzyme package. Yes, it is helpful, but it's really more used for its pentosan load for haze and haze stability and mouthfeel in finished beer. So we can typically get away with very minor sprout damage in soft white wheats. Rye, Abruzzi, and Danko are the primary ones just from a flavor perspective. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but would the sprout damage correlate to falling number?
Yes, same. So we have an RVA test. Falling number is the equivalent. Exact same test, yep. And then oats, these are Brooks is Whole Oats, Streaker's Hullis, spelled Oberkroller. I don't know if we have malted this once. Hold. It was an interesting process. I think 80% of the 3-ton batch floated in the steep tank because of all the husk material. But I cannot tell you how interested brewers are in that particular variety. It tastes like peaches and cream after you malt it, which is funny because it looks like this gladiator grain going in, but it's actually got a really beautiful, delicate flavor after malting. And then we do have a rotating corn line that focuses only and specifically on heirloom or landrace or heritage varieties. We are not into the number 2 yellow dent corn, non-GMO or not. It cannot be more boring in the grain world to me as number 2 yellow dent corn. Flavorless. Yes, the agronomics are great. Heirloom corn is brutal agronomically. It tastes unbelievably fantastic. So when we talk about if we are going into a potential partnership with a grower, we're first going to look at variety selection. So we obviously look at agronomics. We care about you as a grower. We know it's important. And that includes things like yield, climate adaptation, and disease resistance. We've got the climate adaptation kind of knocked out for you already by giving you a scaled down list of potential varieties. Maturity time, we don't need it. We don't want it to be out into the field much past, mid-June. We are in the disease window there of just getting hammered with potential disease and then sprout damage. So we want to get it matured and out of there as quickly as we can. Obviously, dormancy, we talked a little bit about that. But we also have to talk about on-farm infrastructure. So going back to that storage problem, if you were to grow Calypso, for instance, that would need to sit on farm for upwards of about 6 months before. It's about waking up at about Thanksgiving time. And so you need to factor in the need for on-farm infrastructure in the area of storage for a variety like Calypso. Violetta's got a wee bit. Avalon has like absolutely none. I mean, it's got like negative dormancy. I think at this point. So like when you're Avalon would be my suggestion would be to absolutely cut it early. So cut it at that high moisture and dry it down in your bin. Otherwise, grow Violetta. It's just got a little bit more dormancy and protection to it. And so, in a wet year, you kind of got to assume that you're going to be battling against a rain front right about when you need to go to harvest. And then we're obviously looking at well-balanced modification. That's a variety thing. We've already worked on that for you, which I skipped early. I'm sorry about that. And then obviously we want to look at microclimates. There's just areas in Virginia that are tough to grow in. And so we have kind of pockets of microclimates around the state where we've kind of got some good results from. And then we do need some experience with small grain. It does not necessarily have to be with the varieties that we're growing, but on, well-managed small grain rotations and grower thinking and management, because like Nick's slide suggested, it does need to be very well taken care of. Yes?
What's low heat drying? How low or how hot?
Yeah, so I believe we're looking at about like 100 degrees, 120 maybe.
No more than 120.
No more than 120, yeah. So we start kilning finished malt at 120, and that is for a reason. And so we want to keep heat below that in bin drying.
Yeah, you can't just store this stuff in a container in the sun.
Correct.
It will get hot in there, and then all of the bar, unlike wheat, which you could store in a bin and it doesn't matter if it's still alive, it's just going to a mill. This has to be alive.
Yep. It's 12:30. All right, so harvest quality selection. This is what, after you get your harvest finished, we're looking at to make an acceptance or rejection call. So first off, it's got to be the same variety. There's none like, I grew some Violet and some Calypso and I chucked it in the same bin together. Do you want it? They will germinate at completely different rates and at different times. And so we need pure lots of a single variety. If any malt house in general is typically blending on the back end anyways, they're typically malting a single variety for that reason only. There's really no such thing as pre-malting blending for all intents and purposes, unless you're going for a particular nuanced malt flavor that you can market as kind of your own little experiment. So we need to know what we're getting, and it needs to be all of the same. Moisture levels below 14%. So I know we were talking about starting to cut barley at about somewhere around 15, but we need to get it dried below 14 as quickly as possible. And that may just be the blower on your bin getting that last percentage point out. Above 14% with heat is a very good way to kill the embryo, and so we need to, and it will happen like instantly. It needs to be very tightly managed, and so by getting that 14%, you're kind of out of the danger zone. And now we're going to get into some of the primary things we look at. Number one, good test weight is just unfortunately a thing. We are selling extract here, so we're selling plumpness, and plumpness is good test weight. And so we do need at least 48. We can talk about taking lower test weight grain, but you're probably going to get docked or factor in the dockage to remove all of the thins. Sometimes it's not that big of a yield loss. Sometimes it can be. Typically, it's always better than zero. And so there's a potential, if you're willing to aggressively clean it and get rid of all of the thins, the yield will go down of what we take, but you would still be able to keep that premium pricing, which we'll talk about in a bit. We look at germination energy. So is it germinating now? If it's not, if it's dormant, will it germinate once it breaks dormancy? They do that with a peroxide test. And so this just makes sure we're buying grain that's going to grow. And then we're looking at threats to malt quality, pre-harvest sprout damage, pest infestation. I can commiserate with all of you about weevils. It's hard to think that there's a God that invented the weevil. They are the most devastating thing in my malt house. It brings me nightmares. We are constantly dealing with it. I will take potential frost damage or winter kill if it killed some weevils while it was happening. We have a 40-foot reefer container for a reason, so we manage pest load in our storage. Are you going to turn the music on with me? Okay.
Start the Jeopardy music.
And then we need it free of disease. So mainly Fusarium and ergot there. Foreign materials, field debris, pieces of your combine falling into the bag.
Is combine generally clean enough for you? Or do you clean on site?
So we typically will have it. We need to clean it before it goes to the steep tank. Depending on the state, it will always need to be cleaned in general. We do have us specifically are working on the infrastructure piece around this. So for instance, I've got a grain bin at one of my growers' locations for him to use for our stuff. And then I also send him fee-for-service cleaning jobs to help him pay for the seed cleaning equipment he installed to work with us. And so we try to kind of feed the beast there. And so for us specifically, if cleaning's an issue, we have a place that barley can be delivered in bulk and cleaned and then delivered to us. All you have to do is drop it off for all intents and purposes. But we do have the capability to clean on site. Our cleaners really and debeaters are used for finished malt, so we kind of like to keep it that way. But we've cleaned plenty of bushel of grain at this point. So we're typically looking at debearding and seed cleaning. Gravity tables, while wonderful, are probably not really required. It's just really tough when you get like a big vetch load in your harvest. It's hard to clean that out with a seed cleaner. And so when we need to get into density, what's great about vetch is that it floats. And so we can skim it out in the steep tank. But it is very hard to just traditionally clean out with a seed cleaner. So packaging and delivery. So this kind of comes to a preference point. We cannot take delivery at the malt house of a bulk truckload. The grower we work with that has our bin can. If it's coming directly to us, it's got to be in bulk super sacks. Preferably the gusseted type. I know that's annoying, but you can't imagine opening up a tractor trailer and every single bag is tipped on its side. And I have to tip them back up before I can get them out of the truck. It turns a unload into about a 3 or 4 hour nightmare. And so look for gusseted totes. Would need at that point to be well stored. If we're taking a truckload volume, would need to be debearded and cleaned prior, but we'll pay you for it. So we're typically working in like $10 to $12 a bushel for cleaned, accepted quality barley in totes to us. And we also pay delivery if we're freighting that in. Bulk truckload, it's much more convenient for you. There's a backside to that. And so that is typically going for maybe 7 to 8 bushels because they have to clean it before they use it. We do not, like I said, Murphy & Root does not do bulk truckloads at least yet. So the truth is, yes, it's high risk, but it's also high reward. So I'm not going to sit here and say like this is going to be a boon. It's just a really great way to potentially get a premium if all the stars align and the weather cooperates.
Really selling it.
Yeah. And then this all went away. So in terms of just a couple myths here, malting barley requires very low protein. That is not necessarily true. Yes, for base malts, we're looking at 10 to 12% moisture. I'm a specialty malt house, so we also make higher kilned things. We're really looking for higher, slightly high elevated protein for that. It creates good color through Maillard reactions. protein breaks down to amine groups. We use amine groups with simple sugar to drive a Maillard reaction in the kiln. And so a little more protein actually helps us develop color, which then develops flavor. If I'm making a grain distiller's malt, so for bourbon producers, I need like enzymatic packages that can peel paint off the wall. And so 15% is really pretty much like the minimum you need. If we need to get to something astronomical like 200 deep diastatic power, that's very hard to do with low protein because enzymes are proteins. And so we need to find that balance. There is a such thing. Flavia has a preponderance for very low protein. I've had to, unfortunately, reject one load because it was like 8% protein. That's not enough for me to make a converting malt. And so there is a such thing as actually too low protein. We can work with high protein. Is the 13% going to go into the base malt? No, but it will probably go into like a Munich malt. But I make Munich malts, so I need it, so I'll take it. Malting varieties don't grow well in Virginia. Defer to Nick on that. I mean, that is such a tired argument at this point. What is still believed in the brewing industry is that second point, though. They still don't believe grain actually grows here, and so they have to use the distribution channels. I don't know if it's out of convenience or, just not being fully informed. But the other thing is that volume demand is low. Nick was absolutely right. We need to be producing more malting barley for seedsmen to be able to produce the seed. However, we have multiple craft malt houses. Yes, I'm the only craft malt house in Virginia, but North Carolina has 3. Pennsylvania's got 3 or 4. Maryland's got 1. Delaware's not that far away for proximity. And so there are other markets. You don't necessarily have to sell it to me. So you have multiple potential customers. And then, believe it or not, he's correct that there should always be a pre-planting agreement in place. Before you plant the seed, you should have a buyer. However, if something were to go wrong, there is a spot market that exists. We typically lose maybe 30% of our contracted fields, and so I need to go searching to replace that. And I shouldn't say typically 30. We have lost up to 30% of our contracted fields in the past, and so there are options. I need a spot market, and the spot market has kind of been building up as the number of malt houses have brought up.
So,
Yeah.
you guys can keep going.
Yeah.
Just letting you know, lunch has started, and
I'm on my last slide anyways.
Yeah.
So winter varieties, again, it's a paid cover crop option. It's in after corn, but it's out before wheat. So we're about 3 weeks behind, 2 weeks behind wheat for harvest. Wholesale markets are great for higher volume sales if you're not trying to sell it by like the pound or 5 pound bag. Like I said, we're typically buying 44,000 pounds in a full truckload. That can go down to like 14,000 pounds on a small box truck. We can work with things, but it helps to move volume. Obviously, the pre-planting agreements. If you do double crop soybeans, it's a pretty good option because it's not in the way. And then soybeans are a great nitrogen fixer for barley, so we love planting behind soybeans. And then it's a price premium, but it's not this like alien crop, right? It's something that's somewhat familiar. If we can just manage it a little bit closer, you can get a fairly significant premium. And that's that. And Winsy made another cameo appearance. So here's my contact photo or info if anybody needs it. I've also got business cards. I know I'm late. Does anybody have any questions? You're welcome to corner me at lunch or something if you can chat.